Hi, it's the final night of Hanukkah, the eighth night, the eighth light. So welcome, join me in blessings. Okay. Ha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav Mitzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavotenu bayamim ha'em Asman Hazeh. Just want to enjoy the lights for a moment before we begin our story. So tonight's story is actually from a different author, different book. And it's called My Lucky Dreidel, and it's written by my dear friend Cherie Kara Schwartz. This story is called The Biggest Latke in the World. Once upon a time, long, long ago and far, far away, there lived a king. He was a mighty king, but a greedy king. He could have had anything he wanted, but once he had it, he always wanted something more. The king never went out into his kingdom. He just stayed in his big, beautiful castle and relied on spies to tell him about things that were in the world. The king claimed all things new and beautiful for himself, then threw them into his huge royal closet and forgot about them. The king's subjects were very unhappy. Nothing was safe from the king's spies, and the people lived in fear. They were afraid to talk about good things in their lives, but the people decided that the king was not going to ruin their lives, so they found new ways to live. They traded old clothes, materials, and books, and they told each other stories, old and new. They even came to enjoy their lives again, and as long as the king thought that he had the best of everything, there was peace in the land. That was fine for a while, but then the king noticed that there were no more new things to entertain him, and he got bored. So he called his royal spies and said, "Go out, my servants, all over the kingdom and find me something that I do not yet have." And so the spies went out across the land. In midwinter, a spy returned from the farthest corner of the kingdom with wonderful news. "Your supreme and greedy majesty, I have just returned from the far reaches of your impoverished world. Imperial kingdom, and I have found something that you do not have." The cranky king was overjoyed. "What is it? Show it to me at once." And the spy stared at the king, bowed low until his nose touched the ground, and whispered, "I sincerely regret, your majesty, that it is something that I heard about but did not see." "Then take my entire force with you. Leave my royal presence and do not return until you have it. Whatever it is, I must have this thing for my very own." The spy bowed low, and his forehead touched the ground, and then made his way out of the palace, accompanied by the army. They headed for the farthest corner of the kingdom, traveled over hill, dale, mountain, and valley, and finally came to a little hidden community where the Jews had lived quietly and in freedom for many years. The spies got down from their horses and looked around the town. Everything looked plain, simple, and peaceful. There were houses, buildings, gardens, and trees. The spies looked around and they complained about coming to the middle of nowhere. "Stop whining and take a sniff." The spies stopped talking, stopped complaining, and in one gigantic sniff, there wasn't a single sound. And then, It's the most wonderful smell in the world. What is it? They said they couldn't wait for the special something and were hoping that maybe one of you would know what it is. Just then, a smiling old woman came down the road carrying a huge tray of food that smelled delicious. The spies went rushing toward her. Tell us, what do you have there, Granny? It has the most delicious smell in the world. Why, these are latkes, potato pancakes, explained the woman. They're for Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights. Tonight is the first night of the holiday, and I'm taking these to my grandchildren. No, you're not, shouted the king's spies. The king must have everything new and good. He will have these pancakes. Well, that's all right with me. Tell him Grandma Millie hopes that he enjoys them in the best of health. Tell us, asked the spies as nicely as they could, how do you make latkes? Oh, it's the easiest thing in the world. All you need are potatoes, onions, eggs, and a little matzo meal. Lots of oil, a big frying pan, and a nice hot stove. If you'll excuse me, I have to go make more latkes, this time for my grandchildren. Oh, no, you don't. The king can have, should have, and will have all of the latkes in the kingdom. They followed Granny to her house and took all of the ingredients for the latkes. Worse than that, they marched through the town, taking all of the potatoes, onions, eggs, matzo meal, and oil from every house. And then they got on their horses and rode back to the palace. When the spies arrived, the king greeted them. He was in a royal temper. Where in the world have you been? And where is my newest fine thing? The first spy got off of his sweaty, tired horse, touched his chin, nose, and forehead to the ground, and said, Sire, give us an hour, and we will bring you the biggest, crispest, most delicious latke in the world. Latke? What's a latke? Your royal greatness. It is a food that the Jews make for Hanukkah, and I can guarantee you will love it. Just give us enough time to prepare the feast, the first royal latke feast. So the spies made their way to the kitchen, got down the biggest mixing bowls and the biggest spoons, and began making latke mix. They did not know how much of each ingredient to use, so they just used it all. They poured oil onto the griddle and let it get hot. There was so much latke mix that it barely fit into the royal griddle. Then the spies sat down to watch the biggest latke in the world sizzling away. The king came in to see what was taking so long. He was amazed at the wonderful smell that he did something that no one had ever seen him do in 18 years. He smiled. Meanwhile, back in the farthest corner of the kingdom, it had not been wonderful Hanukkah. The people had lit candles in the windows, said the blessing, told the story, sang the songs, and played dreidel, but somehow it wasn't the same without their favorite Hanukkah foods, latke. And now it was the last night, and no one had tasted potato latkes. At the palace, the very greedy king couldn't wait for a taste of the delicious-smelling latke. Give it to me now, he bellowed. But your imperial one, it is still light and pale. It needs to be golden brown. The king did not listen. He grabbed the pan and in doing so flipped the latke up high into the air. It went sailing right out the window and rolled down into the valley. After the pancake, after it now, bellowed the king to his spies. It's mine and no one else's. Capture the latke. All the poor spies and king ran out of the palace, climbed on their horses, went riding off to find the latke that had flown away and was headed for the farthest corner of the kingdom. In Grandma's house, the whole town had gathered to share their favorite stories about latkes. The ones that were plain, apple, jelly, cinnamon, served with sour cream, served with applesauce. Grandma was just telling once again how her latkes had been stolen by the spies when all of a sudden, through the open window flew a huge, still sizzling, golden brown latke, the biggest in the world. A miracle! A miracle! Shouted everyone. Our latke found freedom and came home to us. Everybody grabbed a fork and enjoyed. The latke smelled delicious. They started to eat, and suddenly they heard the sound of horses and the spies crying, "Make way for the king!" All the townspeople stopped in mid-bite and looked toward the door. It really was the king, standing in the doorway, holding a golden fork in one hand. His spies stood behind him, smelling the delicious latke and looking very sad. Grandma took one look at the royal group and said, "Come on in, boys, and join us for a Hanukkah celebration of freedom. Freedom for the Jews. Freedom for the latke." Everyone laughed, and they all sat down to a great latke feast. Happy Hanukkah. I hope you've enjoyed our stories over the last week and Friday, the music. Thanks again to Dominique and to everyone who joined us. I'm recording this before then, so I'm not sure who all is going to be joining us, but have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you next Friday for Shabbat, Kabbalat Shabbat, a normal Kabbalat Shabbat, and just be well. Hag Sameach, Happy Hanukkah.